Have you ever heard that eating cheese before bed will give you nightmares? Or at least cause highly disturbing dreams? It comes up from time to time, but it was particularly popular during the early 1900s when there was a craze for one cheesy dish, Welsh Rarebit. There were comic strips and even animated films whose plot revolved around the nightmares caused by eating Welsh Rarebit. But is there any truth to the fear that eating cheese before bed causes nightmares? Hey there, cheese historians! I'm Julia and this is Cheese History, a channel where we talk about the history of cheese and all of its weird and wonderfulness. Today, we're talking about cheese causing nightmares, and how Welsh Rarebit got caught up in all this due to its popularity during the early 1900s. If you're interested in why Welsh Rarebit has such a strange name, or why it used to be called Welsh Rabbit, I have a whole video on that, which you can watch after you finish watching this one. The link will be in the description below. And just to be clear, because Welsh Rarebit was called either Welsh Rabbit or Rarebit in the different writings that I'll be referring to in this video, I'll be variously calling it either Rabbit or Rarebit, essentially using the two terms interchangeably. Okay, to understand why the idea of cheese causing nightmares was popular in the early 20th century, and why Welsh Rarebit was at the centre of all this, first, we have to look at why Welsh Rarebit was popular at the time. Welsh Rarebit started out with very humble roots. It was a simple dish of toasted cheese on toasted bread, with maybe a few other things added, such as mustard. Over the course of the 19th century, in the United Kingdom, Welsh Rarebit recipes developed from this simple cheese on toast into a much more complex and diverse dish. Partially, I think, because of its increasing popularity with the upper classes of society. In a short story published in 1842, writer William Magin has his heroine describe its preparation with considerable snobbishness. It suddenly occurred to the oldest of the party, Lady Winifred, that something in the shape of supper would be acceptable, and her ladyship selected, I am ashamed to write the word, but it must come, her ladyship selected Welsh rabbits. I can only say in her defence that they were not prepared according to any of the vulgar recipes. Slices of bread were no doubt cut, toasted and buttered. That was left to the care of the servants. But as to obeying injunctions which bid cooks cover them with slices of rich cheese, spread a little mustard over the cheese, and put the bread in a cheese toaster before the fire, we never thought of doing anything so unphilosophic and mechanical. According to the practice of our house, derived from antiquity so remote that it would be vain to seek for it in the triads, the cheese is prepared apart, stewed in a silver chafing dish, into which are gradually introduced, with all the mystery of all the necromancers of old, certain ingredients, which, like theirs, are only communicated to the duly initiated. After a proper quantity of watching and incantation, it flows out a creamy fluid, fit to bathe the expectant toasts. So here we have both the original, simple Welsh Rarebit with toasted, buttered bread topped with toasted cheese, looked down upon as awfully lower class, and the mysterious stewed cheese, which is much more similar to Welsh Rarebit that we would make today. The ingredients are mixed together in a way that's both ancient and mystical to make a cheese sauce that's served immediately on top of toast. You could say that the original Welsh Rarebit is starting to turn into our Welsh Rarebit. After the 1840s, there are many more recipes for the fancy version of Welsh Rarebit, mixing a range of ingredients together to form a sauce, although the original toasted cheese version still appears as well. So, I wonder if, over time, as the two recipes appeared together, they became combined into one recipe. This situation was then cemented during the chafing dish craze of the 1890s to 1920s, when cooking with a chafing dish became a popular thing to do in middle-class households in America. A chafing dish is a means of cooking or keeping food warm by placing the dish with the food in it over a heat source, something like a small flame or in a pan of hot water. This made food preparation a spectacle that could be performed in front of guests. The chafing dish allowed the woman of the house to cook for friends without disappearing into the kitchen to struggle with pots and pans. Chafing dish suppers were typically held at midnight, lending them a somewhat risque air. One of the most popular chafing dish dishes was Welsh Rarebit, perhaps because it was straightforward to make, even though the downside was how messy it could be to eat, with the cheese sauce having a tendency to go everywhere. And as these suppers were held late at night, then Welsh Rarebit could well be the last thing a person eats before going off to bed in the wee small hours of the morning, meaning that any strange dreams they had that night would be connected with their late supper. And so it seems that eating cheese particularly Welsh rarebit before bed, leading to disturbing dreams or nightmares, became lodged in the zeitgeist of the early 20th century, leading to comic strips and animated films. But before we turn to those, let's look at other stories that existed before the 1900s that connect cheese and nightmares. In Britain, the idea that cheese causes nightmares has been around since at least the 17th century, when Robert Hooke wrote in his diary on the 23rd of March 1647, "Slept ill after cheese, dreamt of viragos and other strange phenomenon." A virago is a warrior woman or a woman behaving in a masculine way, truly the stuff of nightmares. Based on this one mention, it's hard to say how prevalent the idea was at the time or how long it had been around. This was the earliest mention that I was able to find, but there may well be earlier instances. If you know of any, please let me know in the comments. There's also the famous line in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, first published in 1843, where Ebenezer Scrooge muses to the ghost of his recently deceased business partner, Jacob Marley. "You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Essentially, Scrooge is trying to convince himself that Marley is a vivid dream caused by indigestion, and a piece of cheese could be one of the culprits. Stories explicitly connecting Welsh rarebit to nightmares start less than 100 years after the earliest recipes. As we saw earlier, in 1842, William Maginn wrote a piece of fiction on Welsh rarebit for Bentley's Miscellany. I quoted his main character's snobbish description of it being made in the first part of this video. So let's look at the rest of the story. It's a little bit too long to read out, so I'll give you a brief summary. If you want to read it in its entirety, I'll provide a link below. It's about a Welsh noblewoman occupying her time in London while her husband is busy at Parliament. One evening, she hosts a dinner party for a number of her Welsh lady relatives. Late in the evening, one suggests that they need some supper, and Welsh rarebit is the winning suggestion. As we saw earlier, the hostess is less than thrilled about this, and likens the preparation of the rabbit to working magic, with secrecy surrounding what was added to the dish. After the other ladies leave, the hostess heads off to bed, but is unable to sleep, kept awake by a growing sense of dread. When she tries unsuccessfully to wake her maid, she discovers that her house has been invaded by robbers, who, after capturing her, agree to spare her life in exchange for all the hidden valuables. While she leads them about the house to point out all the valuables, she accidentally unmasks one of her assailants, who turns out to be the old butler from their estate in Wales, who has known her since she was a child. Thinking the game is up, his accomplices flee. When there are carriages heard outside, he tries to shoot her so he can escape. She valiantly tries to fight him off, and during the struggle, she's awoken by her husband returning home from a long session at Parliament. The whole home invasion was a dream brought on by eating Welsh rarebit for supper. So here we have essentially a thrilling story whose ending is the classic "it was all a dream" twist, with Welsh rarebit as the cause of the hostess's vivid nightmare. But Maginn's story is a work of fiction. In 1902, American writer Harle Cummins published a collection of stories called Welsh Rarebit Tales. The preface goes like this. A preface is the place where an author usually apologizes to the public for what he is about to inflict. Such being the case, I hasten to state that I am only jointly responsible for this aggregation of tales, which resemble more than anything else the creations of a disordered brain. The origin of the Welsh rarebit tales was as follows. A certain literary club, of which I am a member, is accustomed to hold semi-occasional meetings at some of the uptown hotels. Having run short of first-class plots, the club at a recent meeting decided to try a gastro-literary experiment. Knowing the effect upon the digestive and cerebral organs of indulging in concentrated food before retiring, we each partook, just before adjourning, of the following combination. 1 large portion Welsh rarebit, 1 broiled live lobster, 2 pieces homemade mince pie, 1 portion cucumber salad. At the second meeting of the club, the next meeting by the way, had to be postponed on account of illness of 14 of the members. The accompanying tales were related. Partially as a warning to injudicious diners, we decided to publish the result of our experiment, hoping that all who might read this book and see the nightmares which are produced will be warned never to try a similar feat, or eat. By unanimous sentence of the other 14 members, and as punishment for having been the originator of the scheme, mine was chosen as the unlucky name under which the tales should appear. The works that follow are a collection of bizarre stories of monsters, mad scientists, circus performers, castaways, among a whole host of other things, all blamed on their author's late-night meal, which included Welsh rarebit and other foods that have been linked to nightmares or bizarre dreams. If you want to read these stories, I'll include a link in the description to where you can do so, or you can even listen to them as an audiobook. And just be warned that they are very much of their time. Of course, it isn't possible to tell whether Cummins is telling the truth regarding how these stories came into being, or whether it was just a handy explanation for such a strange collection of stories. It's kind of suspicious that every one of the 15 writers had a disturbing dream as a result of their nightmare-inducing meal, but it shows that by the early 1900s, the connection between Welsh rarebit and nightmares was alive and kicking. It isn't too surprising then that it was at this time that this would become the focus of newly emerging forms of media, such as early animation. So how did that come about? It all began on September the 10th, 1904, with a comic strip in the New York Evening Standard by Winsor McCay titled Dream of the Rarebit Fiend. The basic premise of the comic is that a random character, usually an adult, has a nightmare experience while going about their mundane daily life. The intensity of the dream ranges from mild titillation or embarrassment, walking in public without trousers or stuttering while making a public speech, to horrific, being buried alive or watching an inanimate object become a dangerous monster. A dream atmosphere pervades each episode because of the detached calm of most of the protagonists. For example, in the October 26, 1904 strip, an elderly man is dismembered by traffic on Broadway, yet he keeps up a rambling monologue as he loses limbs, torso, and head. The dreamer awakens in the final panel, always blaming the disturbing night visions on a before-bedtime meal of Welsh rarebit. One of the comics in the Rarebit Fiend series prompted a separate comic aimed at children called Little Nemo in Slumberland, and it was these two comics that became the basis of much of McCay's early animation work. His first animated film was called Winsor McCay, the famous cartoonist of the New York Herald and his moving comics, or Little Nemo, and was based on the children's comic. It has quite a long live-action prologue setting up a wager between McCay and his fellow artists as to whether he can bring his cartoons to life. The animation itself was made of thousands of individual drawings, each being a single frame of the animated part of the film. It's a fairly simple sequence, with various characters from the Little Nemo comic moving about and interacting with each other, all in colour. With the success of Little Nemo, McCay was able to make other animated films. His second animated work was How a Mosquito Operates, based on one of his Rarebit Fiend comics from 1909. The animated version was completed and released in 1912. By the way, links to where you can watch all of these animated films will be in the video description. McCay created a couple of other animated films in the 19-teens not related to his comic strips, one about a dinosaur and another on the sinking of the British ocean liner the Lusitania by a German U-boat in 1915. Then in 1921 he completed two more based on the Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend comic, Bug Vaudeville and The Pet, while his son Robert McCay is credited for a third, The Flying House. Each contains a bizarre story. Bug Vaudeville is full of insects performing circus acts. The Pet has a small dog-like pet growing into a huge beast that terrorizes the city. And The Flying House has a couple who fly off in their house to escape their creditors. After these films, however, McCay was too busy with his contract to draw comics for newspapers to make any more. However, he had already made his mark on the animation industry, establishing many of the methods of animation that would be used for decades. So in a way, Welsh rarebit and its infamy for causing nightmares inspired McCay to create comics that he then turned into animated films, which had a huge impact on animation. McCay likely caused some people to have bad dreams as well, as some of the animation sequences are truly the stuff of nightmares. Okay, so that's the story of how Welsh rarebit's popularity during the chafing dish craze, combined with the widespread belief that eating cheese before bed would cause nightmares, led to some truly terrifying and groundbreaking examples of early animation. But I bet that you're all still wondering whether cheese does actually cause nightmares or not. So let's turn to that. The question of whether cheese causes nightmares isn't a topic that's led to a large number of scientific studies. Which is a shame, because if it was, we might be able to answer the question of whether cheese causes nightmares with some degree of certainty. But some work has been done, particularly in the area of the impact of different foods on the quality of sleep. In 2005, the Daily Mail reported on one study by the British Cheese Board on the impact of cheese on people's dreams. The study, which was never officially published, was conducted on 200 people over the course of a week. Participants were fed different cheeses before bed to see if they produced different types of dreams. There were no nightmares, regardless of the different types of cheese. But the researchers did conclude that the type of cheese could impact the types of dreams that people had. This is how the Daily Mail described the findings. Stilton caused the most crazy dreams, with 75% of men and 85% of women eating Stilton experiencing odd and vivid dreams. Examples of these mad dreams included a vegetarian crocodile upset because it could not eat children, and soldiers fighting each other with kittens rather than guns. If you want a star-studded dream, then your best bet is cheddar. Almost 2/3 of volunteers eating cheddar reported dreaming about celebrities, including Jordan and Johnny Depp. Or if you're missing old friends, then try Red Leicester. More than 6 out of 10 volunteers eating the cheese had nostalgic dreams about their past, including school days and childhood friends. British Brie tended to give women nice dreams, such as Jamie Oliver cooking dinner in their kitchen, while the men had odd dreams, such as having a drunken conversation with a dog. If you just fancy a good night's kip, then Cheshire cheese could be for you, with over half of knights and volunteers eating this type completely dreamless. I'll admit it all sounds pretty appealing. Pick the type of dream you want, and eat that type of cheese before bed, and hey presto, you can control your dreams. However, the fact that this unpublished study was conducted by the British Cheese Board, which has a vested interest in people eating more cheese, means that we should treat these results, even though they're rather funny, with some caution. A more serious 2015 Canadian study on the impact of food on bizarre and disturbing dreams tentatively concluded that eating cheese may, in some individuals, adversely influence subsequent dreaming. They found that eating dairy products was reported by a number of the participants in their study to result in either disturbing or bizarre dreams. However, the researchers suggest that this could be impacted by a number of factors, including eating too much, lactose intolerance, or the pre-existing belief that eating dairy products like cheese causes such dreams. Thus, eating a lot of cheese before going to bed while being reminded that this will surely cause bizarre dreams may enhance the likelihood that bizarre dreams will occur. They drew several other interesting correlations from the data they had, including that fasting for longer intervals during the day could induce vivid dreams. However, their final conclusion was that more research on this matter needs to be done to really know whether foods like Welsh Rarebit have any impact on the quality and types of dreams. The fact that they regularly referred to McCay's cartoons throughout their study as an example of the idea that eating cheese leads to nightmares just shows how much impact he may have had on the idea. Yes, it was certainly around before that, but it could well be that McCay's cartoons and his animated films somehow cemented this idea in the social conscience of the time, and it's been passed down ever since. Of course, it's just as likely that it reflected an already prevalent belief. We may never know for certain either way. All the evidence we have so far suggests that there's no firm link between eating cheese and nightmares, other than tentative links suggesting that Ebenezer Scrooge may well have been right, and that bizarre dreams and nightmares could have been caused by indigestion, intolerance, or just eating too much. Or it could simply be that because we believe that eating cheese causes weird dreams, that whenever the two coincide, we make the connection, ignoring all the times that they don't. But there are many gaps in the current research, so perhaps this will be finally resolved one way or another in the future when someone does a more in-depth study. However, if you have any stories about cheese or Welsh Rarebit leading to vivid or horrifying dreams, do tell me all about it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, Cheestorians, and a special thank you to my patrons over on Patreon who make these videos possible. So, next time you eat cheese before bed, try not to think about how it might cause disturbing dreams. And I'll see you next time for more cheese history. Ooh.